Is Donald Trump serious about the 51st state? Hi, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun. We've been hearing the U.S. president talk about the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state since, well, December, when Justin Trudeau went down to go visit Donald Trump even before he was inaugurated. Went down for the visit at Mar-a-Lago, and a little while later the story came out that Trump had said, hey, why don't you become the 51st state? You could be the governor. Trump is still calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau of Canada. He appears to be mocking Trudeau. Well, that's one thing. But on this idea of the U.S. trying to take over, annex, absorb Canada, is it serious? That's the question that I wanted to find out. Now, some of my colleagues in the media are just outraged about this. We all should be upset about it, but is it serious talk? How do you find out? Well, you talk to people who would know. That's not something many of them are willing to do. They'd rather just scream Orange Man bad and be done with it. No, if you want to know what your opponent wants, you need to listen to them. You need to talk to people who know their way of thinking. You need to figure out what they're up to. That's what I was doing this week in Washington. I went down, I followed the premiers around, I talked to U.S. politicians, and I took an opportunity to reconnect with Steve Bannon. I worked with Steve Bannon several years ago when he was at Breitbart. I was at Sun News Network, appeared on radio with him. He came on TV with me, but I didn't talk to him in more than a decade. But I've been seeing him muse about this idea of why Donald Trump wants to annex Canada. Now listen carefully to the conversation, because if you do, you'll find out that it is about a specific issue. In Bannon's view anyway, we don't know what Trump actually thinks, but in Bannon's view, it's about one issue, and that's security. And to achieve that doesn't necessarily mean Canada becoming part of the United States. But clearly, Trump wants something. Here's what I found out through my discussion with Steve Bannon at the War Room.
What is the motivation behind all of these different actions that Donald Trump is taking?
Days of thunder?
Yeah, whether it's Canada or Panama or Greenland, I keep hearing people say, there's no relation, it doesn't make any sense. And I say, well, I don't get the Canadian angle yet. Maybe you can explain it to me, but I get a lot of the other angles because I look at it and I see he's trying to combat China.
Well, you look at just in that's of a whole piece. It makes total geostrategic and geoeconomic sense. And this ties to what's happened the last 24 or 48 hours in Europe with Pete Hegseth and Scott Bessent over with NATO. What President Trump laid out in what I call the Panama to Greenland is kind of Alfred Mahan's naval strategy to say he's going to look at hemispheric defense, kind of Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And that's going to be from taking back the Panama Canal to make sure the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy can never hook up in the Caribbean, all the way up to Greenland. And remember, Greenland, if you control Greenland or in partnership with a free Greenland and have bases there like we've had in World War II, there it was to keep the sea lanes open. Here is to close the sea lanes against Russian fast attack and ballistic missile submarines coming out of the Arctic, out of both Murmansk and Archangel. If you control that sea lane between Greenland and Iceland, which the United States will do, and not just have tracking sonobuoys, but actually control it with naval forces, and you control the Panama Canal, you've essentially hermetically sealed the United States from attack by the Soviets, by the Russians. If you add then Canada geostrategically, because the new great game, and the great game people should know, was this strategic contest in the 19th century between the British Empire and the Russian Empire through Afghanistan and Persia for access to warm water ports and to access to India, which Britain was trying to stop. The new great game of the 21st century is going to be the Arctic. It's already a great power struggle between the Chinese Communist Party and the Russians up there. Canada's former most secure border, your northern provinces, are now your soft underbelly. And so what President Trump is saying is that if you look at the entire picture, everywhere from the 3 island chains in the Pacific, that would just guarantee that the Pacific became a natural barrier for Canada, coupled with what's happening in the Arctic and what the United States is going to do, coupled with Greenland and this hemispheric defense. There's such a compelling logic on both geostrategically and geoeconomically when you look at the combination of the markets. This is what President Trump, I think, is talking about tariffs. If you look at particularly your western provinces, for people in Canada, the western provinces of Canada are not that much different than Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas. It's that Western frontier mentality with the same kind of natural resources, both agriculture and natural resources and oil and gas. So there's so many compelling logic, and President Trump's laying it out there. Don't look at Canada separate from Greenland and from Panama because it's of a whole piece.
He's about
hemispheric defense.
Okay.
And once you, by the way, think about it. So hang on, but this
okay.
is for the Canadians too on your defense budget and particularly NATO. He said today with NATO that, and this goes for Canada, he says, hey, no offense, we bailed you out in World War I. We bailed you out in World War II. We bailed you out in the Cold War. You're just not a priority anymore. And the Russian army is kind of your problem. We'll still be there, but it's not vital national security interests. And the Canadian people, I think, have to have a deep conversation with themselves about the direction of the 21st century. I mean, Canada's been a tremendous ally of the United States, but they've been a better ally of Britain and Europe. Look at the blood sacrificed by the Canadian people in World War I. Massive. Look at the bravery. People never talk about it, but on D-Day, look at the sacrifice of the Canadian forces at the tip of the spear on D-Day and then going through Normandy and the breakout to Paris. Tremendous sacrifice. Look at everything that happened early on when the American volunteers went up to Canada to become part of the Royal Air Force to fight the Nazis in the early days. Canada, more as much as the United States, has sacrificed more for old Europe, as Churchill said. I think Churchill actually said it in Canada, that the new world was coming to the defense of the old world. Well, look, after doing it for a century, the new world's saying, look, we have our own strategic concerns, particularly with the Chinese Communist Party. And please, in Canada, remember, the greatest vulnerability we have now is the Arctic. Okay, that's where it all comes together. It's a great power struggle. And President Trump is bound and determined to secure the United States from that. And that's why I think Canada's a central part. If you go back and look at the economics, on both us as a unified market, geoeconomically, if you look at the logic of us united geostrategically in a hemispheric defense, the logic speaks for itself. I just think it's now time for the Canadian people to start to really think through the 21st century. Because if you look at Canadian politics, it's been so much small ball over the last couple of decades. Now, huge questions about the future of the country and the future of the 21st century are before you. One last thing, let me say.
Okay.
President Trump is not trolling people in this. I have people call me all day long. Is President Trump just trolling? Is President Trump just trolling Canadians?
That's what it seemed like at the beginning.
Yes,
it seemed like he was poking Justin Trudeau in the eye.
Although he refers to Trudeau as Governor Trudeau.
Yeah.
He is not, for the Canadian people. This is why I've decided in a very busy time to take this interview, because I have such respect for you and such respect for your paper. This is serious. President Trump I think of everything we're working on, that President Trump's working on, I think this hemispheric defense, which is Panama, it's also Latin America, with Bolsonaro and with Lilley and getting the Chinese Communist Party out of the Amazon. But this part from Panama to the security of all of it with Greenland and Canada, the Arctic, coupled with getting out 10 million or 12 million illegal alien invaders that were able to come through our country through the southern border. He is not trolling the Canadians. He's certainly not trolling your prime minister, who he refers to as your governor.
So the part that I think a lot of Canadians wouldn't get, and first off, people will be angry, and there's a very emotional response, and Donald Trump, by talking about the 51st state and the tariff issues, may actually help re-elect Trudeau's Liberal Party with Mark Carney as the new leader. But the part that a lot of Canadians would be scratching their heads at and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no aggressive war with China. There's no, nothing with Russia. We don't have to be worried. We're past the point of needing to be worried about defense, is the view of a lot of people.
The view of anybody that thinks that is sound asleep. And let me wake them up. Number one, let's go back to World War II, of which, remember, Canada has shed more blood per capita than probably any democracy in the West in pursuit of freedom. Okay? The bravery and courage of the Canadian people can't be questioned. It's unbelievable what you guys have done. But I think now you got to think about, what was that all for? If you go back to World War II, if we're looking at the same place like in 1939 after the invasion of Poland, when the war really actually kind of got going, not the preamble to it, which was a long lead up. There were not that many casualties even through the fall of France. Look what's happened in Ukraine in 3 years, and we've been adamantly opposed to any involvement in Ukraine. It was ridiculous. As President Trump reiterated today, 1.5 million people have either been slaughtered or wounded in this war. 1 million Ukrainians and 500, 750,000 Russian troops. Ukraine looks like Kiev. If you look at the carnage that's gone on, you throw in the Middle East, it's far greater than the early years of the Second World War, and we saw how that ended. If you also look at the Chinese Communist Party, unrestricted warfare, the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the United States since May of 1989. Xi said it, the People's War. They're doing it through cyber, they're doing it through political warfare, they're doing it through information warfare, they're doing
political interference in Canada?
Canada, you guys are much far. Look, as badly as we're infiltrated, Canada's actually worse. And Trudeau's exacerbated this. This is something the Canadian people got to wake up to. You're losing your sovereignty as you speak. That's why your crisis on your northern border. The irony in Canada, given everything through valor of arms and courage that you've defended, now what was always strategically your greatest, the thing you had greatest, which was your northern border and kind of the Arctic, now becomes your greatest exposure to actual losing territorial integrity and sovereignty, the Chinese Communist Party, which has already infiltrated Canada. Look at Huawei. Look at all the situations in Canada. They're at war just because, remember, in Chinese Communist Party doctrine, if they have to start like Sun Tzu, if they have to start shooting, they think the kinetic part, which has already started in Europe and Ukraine, the kinetic part of the war is where they don't want to take on the foreign devils, right? Because the foreign devils know how to man up and know how to fight. What they want to do is unrestricted warfare, is defeat the West even before any guns are fired. And they're quite far advanced in the United States, and I would argue they're farther advanced in Canada. So people sit there and go, well, we're not really at war. That's like people in Europe in 1930, in the summer of 1939, sitting there going, we're actually not at war. It's a beautiful summer here. And the clouds of war were all over them. They just couldn't see over the horizon.
It was around 2010. I think it was President Hu back then was coming to Canada. He was going to visit then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Official visit, things had not changed. Even the bipartisan consensus in Washington still hadn't changed towards China. It has now, and it has in Canada. Well, maybe not for Trudeau's Liberals. But I remember reading a piece where Hu said, before he left, I mean, this was clearly a planted message to send to Canada as he was coming for a visit, that they view themselves as an Arctic nation, and they believe that they get the resources in the Arctic. They have a very different vision of the future of the Arctic than Canada or the United States does, and it includes them pillaging it.
It includes them controlling it and controlling the territory of northern Canada. You're absolutely correct. This is not just something that came to President Trump out of nowhere. This is the aggressiveness of the Chinese Communist Party in the Arctic, geostrategically and for resources. And as a wake-up call, when they say the Arctic, they just don't mean the polar cap. They mean coming down, and you're going to lose. It's just quite simple. You're a Dominion nation. But in your alliance in the Dominion, is NATO going to come and help you? Is NATO that won't pay for themselves? Are they going to come and help you in the Arctic? The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Canada is going to be tested and lost in the northern provinces and around Canada. And he said it on a state visit. This was 14 years ago. And they've been laboring away long before then, but they've been laboring away since then. And they're a major Arctic power.
So you mentioned Panama, Greenland, Canada. Don't separate them out. I was just here covering all the provincial premiers going into meetings at the White House, going into meetings with officials, talked to business leaders who were in meetings and all those as well. They said defense was raised, the border was raised, fentanyl was raised. No one raised the 51st state idea. So does President Trump believe that Canada does need to become a 51st state, or just grow up and act like we used to?
President Trump, look, in a wide range of verticals that he's going down every day and dropping thunderbolts in the days of thunder, where he spends his time and what he talks about, people should take as a papal bull, because it's opportunity cost. He could talk about other things. What is he doing today? Today, he's not only meeting Modi of India, who he's very close to, but he's also signing the tariffs on reciprocity. They do not...
That's not for Canada.
It's not for Canada.
That's for
But
India.
it's not Canada. But you can see in his overall economic model for the United States, revenues from outside are going to come and lessen the deficits we have here, because he believes this is a premier market. He knows it's a premium market. So you have to pay, just like you would buy a skybox at a sporting event or get a front row ticket at a concert, you're going to pay a premium. And what he's saying is that, hey, if you give tariffs, and a lot of this I think is aimed specifically at India. That's why it's so interesting he's doing it on this day. But he spends his time, and particularly when he's communicating either the true social or what he's talking about, I think of everything he's working on. I tell people, I think the hemispheric defense, because it also underpins his new business model for the United States, which we are in a very tough financial situation. I tell people, I don't know if he's got a higher priority than hemispheric defense.
But does that necessarily mean, I mean, his latest word to describe it is absorbing Canada. Does that mean the United States has to absorb Canada, or do you work together?
The form of that is to be determined. Remember, President Trump is a master deal maker, but I do think, just like he's making a deal now about Ukraine and getting that war done, he's doing a deal in the Middle East to get that done. He's a deal guy. He's a deal guy.
And he has talked about Canada as much as he's talked about the Middle East, probably more lately than he's talked about Ukraine.
More. I tell folks that, I say, see where he spends his time, see what his default position when he's got some free time. This thing about Greenland, Panama, and you have to look at it whole cloth. This is about hemispheric defense and what this market means to the world and what this market means to the citizens in this market. So he's obsessed with this issue of Canada. So now I think there will be, what form it takes. I don't speak for the president. That's the president, and he's got ideas about how he wants to see things evolve. I would talk to, but I believe that leaders in Canada, I think he is waiting for however it plays out for the new government. I do believe they're going to have serious talks. Now, the people around him talking about defense and things like that, I think it's fantastic. But don't doubt for a second that the man himself is, quite frankly, very obsessed with this. And if you look at the strategy and the economics of it, it's so compelling. He's not going to get off this. He's going to get engaged with whoever your government is, and there will be a process going forward. Now, what's the ultimate outcome of that process? That's not my line of country.
So, for the people, you said don't think that he's trolling. So for the people that still think that this is him trying to get under Trudeau's skin or him just trying to set out a negotiating position, this is about more than a negotiation, you say.
Exactly. I think he has such respect. His partners in Canada, he has such respect. Plus, President Trump is a student of military history. For those of us that are students of military history, the valor and heroism of the Canadians, particularly in World War I and World War II, are really astronomical. I just think that there's got to be my strongest recommendation. I say this to all my friends and people during the inauguration. A lot of people from Western provinces, business people and people in government, came and actually sat where you're seeing today, or I hosted them upstairs. And I just tell them, I said, you should begin a national conversation about this. This is the time that Canada should really talk about the 21st century, and where the comment of the premier of president of China didn't get a lot of play back in 2010. You should revisit that, and that should be a big part of the national discussion. Look, clearly, the Canadian people have to make up their mind about what they want to do and where they want to go and who they want to be affiliated with. But I think that conversation, those discussions and that debate should commence.
It might be having the reverse outcome of what he wanted, because conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was looking like he was going to form the next government. Now anger over this has a Mark Carney-led Liberal government tied or leading, and you could end up with a very left-wing environmental zealot who will win by campaigning against
a very left-wing environmental zealot like the government you've had will only lead Canada more rapidly to the edge of the abyss, right? These people are radicals. They have these bizarre economic theories.
So he wants a carbon tariff on anything that comes from a country that doesn't have it. What would the reaction be in Washington to Canada saying, if your climate plan's not good enough, and the American one would not be good enough for Mark Carney, what would the reaction be to Canada putting a carbon tariff on every import that we have from you?
I think it would be a complete rethinking here in the country about what our relationship is with Canada. I think that if you did that, you would essentially say that we're a hostile power. I think it would be reviewed by the American people as that, and I think it would be reviewed by people in Washington as that, and I think it would be reviewed by President Trump as that.
What should we be watching for in the next couple of weeks?
Number one, I think just continue to watch President Trump. And one thing, he's not trolling. And this is why I think when he talks about this, and he talks about the geoeconomics of it, he talks about the geostrategic nature of it, is you should spend time understanding what it means about Panama to Greenland, what it means about the real threat to the Canadian people, what it means about, this is a naval strategy. This is essentially take the Western Hemisphere, which is an island. It's a relatively small island off of the Eurasian landmass, which is the main, if you look at Earth's globe, you have a massive landmass, Eurasia and with Africa. Then you have a relatively small compared to that island off that is the Western Hemisphere. You have a Pacific Ocean that is, the Pacific is almost like a huge ocean desert, okay? What the president is proposing is really a naval strategy of the 3 island chains in the Pacific, with the Pacific Ocean also protecting us, and Atlantic Ocean, where the United States Navy and potentially the Canadian Navy basically shut in the Russian fast attack and ballistic missile submarines in the Arctic, or that we can follow them wherever they go. We've controlled the Panama Canal, so there's no possibility of the Chinese Navy, which is huge, teaming up with the Russian Navy in the Caribbean. You've essentially sealed off the hemisphere of North America, right? And so hemispheric defense. Then you look at what President Trump's talking about in an Iron Dome as some sort of anti-ballistic missile sort of apparatus, of which Canada would participate in. It's pretty. You unlike the sacrifice we had in the 20th century, which did not. Remember, it did not save us from the problems in Europe. We then had to go back and win the Cold War. And quite frankly, they've come back in Ukraine. And so Europe as a cockpit of these conflicts is not going to go away. But that's a European problem. And the Russian army is a European problem. It's not an American, it's not a Canadian problem. I think what the Canadian people would do is, number one, take this seriously, follow what President Trump's saying, and I think get it on your national agenda and start having talk shows and conferences. People are to be debating this.
All right, Steve Bannon, thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
You've heard the discussion. You can let me know what you think of his ideas, and how do we stay sovereign and still deal with some very real security concerns. The Americans are not wrong to believe that we have a soft underbelly in the Arctic. We clearly have not invested enough in defense over the past several decades. We clearly do not have the ability to defend the Arctic as it is now. So what do we do about this? Drop a comment down below, send me an email, share this on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.